Good afternoon, everyone. We're about to get started. I'm Scott Heminger. I'm the project manager. I'm joined by Jonathan Flick, senior associate at LRK in Waylu. He is an urban designer as well. Unfortunately, Frank Ricks, he wanted to be here today. He's feeling a little under the weather. He sends his regards and he's following the project closely. We also are joined on the screen via Zoom through with our market analyst, who is Howard Cohn with the Chesapeake Group. He's going to do about a 20-minute presentation. We'll pause at that end of that portion, having a Q&A with him before we move on to the training session. Next slide. So a little bit about our agenda today. You have that in front of you. It is, we're going to start off with a recap of our last meeting, steering committee meeting 3. You'll notice there's a few new faces in the group. There was also a steering committee set up for Covington. They have now been rolled into this. There is going to be a portion of this document that will address land use within Covington as well.
Which we appreciate, by the way, just real quick before we go on with that, we just appreciate everybody's patience and working with us on that. This will be a better, more holistic plan together than it would have been looking at each entity and each jurisdiction separate. So taking this holistic view, it only strengthens the plan for everybody involved. So we just appreciate all of y'all's hard work in getting us here.
We've been working with Sean and we really appreciate his help getting up the website. So we'll go into the website and show you what's on there. There's going to be continuous uploads. We are working on a survey that will go on there as well that will inform not only the land use plan, but the market analysis that is underway as well. We'll meet with Howard. He'll go through his summary. We'll have that Q&A. We'll talk about the visioning session details and then start to work into the public engagement session and the training for that. So some summary of this second meeting. As you might remember, we adopted our vision statement and guiding principles during that meeting. We went through and we reviewed the base maps. Then we started to talk about the locations and dates of these meetings in April. And some of the details on the agendas, the public notice and website, just to try to get the word out. Possible names for the project, we had a poll. And we did select a name. It was the one that the group mainly chose to put together. And then the visioning details. Next slide. So while Wade pulls up the website, it will be going live very shortly. Thanks to Sean's help. We kind of review what is on there. So we have a little introduction. And then we get into some of the details. So there'll be like meetings posted, agendas, some of these videos.
So like the sessions that we've been recording will be available online for public review.
That's right. We'll have a library. So like the base maps, everything like that will be on that library.
Yes.
So you can go through those series of different base maps. We'll eventually have one placed up there for Covington as well. It kind of zooms in on that community. And of course, the steering committee. So we really appreciate your help pulling this together and helping us through the actual public portion of this project.
One of the reasons, as a reminder, the decision was made to put this on the county website was this still needs to be the go-to place. We want the public to be get used to coming to this website. We know the public already engages a lot through the county website. We want to facilitate and encourage that activity so that even after this process is done, when people have a question, instead of making up things in their head or looking at social media to find the information, say, well, this is where I go to find that information first and foremost for something that's accurate and timely. Will always be the county and then the city website.
So currently we're working with Rob and some of the staff here along with Howard to put this survey together. It will go live, we believe, before the 13th of April, which is our first meeting. And when you open up this website, from what we understand from Sean, it will immediately bring up the poll, the option to take the poll. We do encourage you to take that, to pass that information along to others to get help us inform the land use plan and the market analysis. So while Wade switches over to the slides for Howard, I want to also mention, we're going to have to breeze through a lot of this early on because we may have problems with the battery.
Yeah. It's my fault.
Just to make sure we get through Howard.
I'm not sure what community in West Tennessee we're in charge of this, but it's somewhere. Have to backtrack. Yeah.
Yes. Howard, can you hear us?
I hear you just fine. Can you hear me fine?
Yes.
Okay.
We're ready for you to go.
First, let me thank, because I know I interviewed a lot of the people who are in this room. I want to thank you again for the time that you spent with me. It was well worth it from our team perspective. And we look forward to continuing to do that. There's a couple people that we didn't get, including the mayor, and we'll get to them hopefully in the next week or so. But I want to talk a little bit. We have preliminary results, and I use the word preliminary for a variety of reasons. It was just mentioned to you that there's a survey, okay, that is being done. There's a great deal of data that will be developed in that survey, which will be very important to us in fine-tuning our numbers, fine-tuning the kinds of housing units that may happen, the kinds of commercial activity that may happen, and that kind of thing. So it'll get into a level of detail beyond that once we have that information, but also because we're evolving. What we looked at so far, I'm going to tell you in a few minutes. And at the end, I'm just going to go over and give you some idea of some of the other additions that we have that are still in the works. So there's a couple concepts that I think are really important and misconceptions often that exist out there. You'll see a lot of studies that are done that focus on population. Well, population is not as important as housing units and the households. Many of you that are in this room that sit on this committee will understand well what I'm saying, because if you look at your own household, you may have raised children in a housing unit, the children are gone. So the population may have decreased in that household, which when you fill out your census form means that you may have 1 or 2 people in there now, where 10 years ago you had 3 or 4 people. So the population is not important as the housing unit itself and the household that's in there. So we have a tendency to use households and housing units because we think it's much more reflective. When you look at the population that you have right now, consideration in the housing units is that we don't have a very large unemployment base. As you know, it hovers around 3% in the county right now, which means essentially anybody that's looking for a job that really wants one has one. Now, they may want a higher paying job than what they have, but they do have a job. The second thing that is important, and again relates to housing and relates to future projections of households and housing units, and that is we use the term in planning and have for years, and it's used in the census, it's used everywhere else, single family and multifamily housing. Some of you that I met with know that if you think about your own household, very few households today fall in line with a husband and wife and 2 children who are still in school, etc. Most of our households don't look like that at all anymore. We have an aging population. We have a lot of other factors that have come into play. So those are really misnomers. And when we talk about a single family home or housing unit, you're really talking about a unit that is not attached to any other unit by walls or at the ceiling level. That's really important to understand. So we're talking about a detached unit. Multifamily has nothing to do whether there's a family in there or there's an individual in there with the size of it, or a multi-generational family. It just means that it's got at least one wall or a ceiling that is attached to another unit. Okay, so it's really important to look at it that way because our world has changed and is continuing to evolve. We have a situation where there's mobility in our population that had never existed before. Some of you I know have that in your families, where in previous generations everybody stayed in Tipton County, but they don't today, they go out. So it's really important that we understand that there's mobility, and mobility means to an employer a lot of times, particularly a major employer, Once upon a time, people came to work for them and wanted a career, whether if it's professional or line or whatever. Today, most of the people are looking for jobs. And I always like to put myself, in the shoes of whomever it is. And as I told a couple of you, and I said, in my own household, my kids, after they finished school, in the first 5 years of working, had more jobs than I had in my entire lifetime. And I think many of you will find that that's also true. So the bottom line is that it's really about that and adjusting to the changes that are happening in our society. The third concept, which is important, which you're going to see in the numbers, is market share. Market share, both external and internal. It is important from a political standpoint. It is important from a funding standpoint down the line. It is important from resources that Ford, or one of its ancillary activities, and it does have a number of them, the money that it'll put into the community often is based upon the impact that it thinks it's having on that community. One of its evaluations is how large the population that works for them is within that community. So market share is important, and market share in between a Covington and Mason, let's say, is also important internally from a political perspective, as well as what happens with your resources that have to be developed, i.e. from an infrastructure standpoint, etc. The fourth one, which is really, really critical, is something that I call latent demand. It's demand that sits but can't be met at this point in time. You're going to see projections that show 5 years out that we're going to have a need for a lot of housing units that we don't have right now. The fact of the matter is that they can't be exercised. So what happens in that interim? Because Haywood may not be able to, and the other counties, Shelby County, may not be able to provide those housing units either. What happens is if someone drives a much further distance for a job, or if they come from inside the county, somebody else has to replace them in the job they're currently in. That demand can't be exercised until a certain point in time. Right now in the housing market, and this changes from time to time, right now in the housing market, there are people that are saying, gee, last year I could pay $250,000 for a home or $150,000 for a home, and I'd get this much house. Today, because the interest rates have doubled in that period of time, they're not saying they can do that any longer. So they sit until they believe that they're ready and can afford the unit. Interest rates will go up, interest rates will come down. They were at historic lows for a long period of time, up until the last 2 years. So, the fact of the matter is that all impacts whether or not demand can be exercised at any point in time. The fifth concept is the natural pattern. You have had growth in households, little growth in population, but you continue to add housing units to your stock. That changes over time. The last couple years, since the technical end of the COVID, we had some growth since the technical end of the Great Recession, which was in 2011. We had a different pattern of growth. In between, things have a tendency to slow down. The same thing happens with our own businesses. If we're in the cotton business and people aren't buying clothes, probably the demand for cotton goes down. So, and we're not getting as much from a revenue perspective to the individual farmer in the area. So we have a natural pattern that evolves. And on top of that now, we have a force from outside, right at our border, that is all of a sudden, it's a major force with employment, whether if it ends up being 4,500 or 6,500 or 8,500 people, it is a huge influx that impacts demand. The sixth concept is multiplier. When you go to a store, you spend money. Let's say you spend $1. That dollar goes into that store's coffers. A part of that goes to provide whatever. Let's say you bought an apple. Okay, it goes, or I guess you're not going to buy cotton, cotton ball. Okay, although you might, for cosmetic purposes. But the fact of the matter is, you're going to buy something. That buying gets spent again and again and over again in the economy. So your dollar may create 3 other dollars down the line before it peters out. Some of it gets exported, some of it stays. So that multiplier is very critical, because when we create a job it means we're actually creating the opportunity for other jobs down the line, or for somebody's income to increase as a result of it. The seventh is supportable square footage of space. In commercial activity, in retail in particular, and most other commercial activity, even office employment, a business needs a certain dollar amount per square foot in order to break even or provide a return on investment for the person who owns or the entity that owns and operates that space. That varies from the kind of business, and what we've done and doing in the commercial is we look at about 50 different kinds of retail activity. Each one of them has a different supportable square footage that is necessary for them to break even. Let's change to the next slide. So we came up with numbers, okay, for estimates of demand. The first dealing with housing, because housing, if you don't have housing, if you don't have somebody spend money, you don't have retail. A lot of people believe you build retail and they will come. Well, that is not really the case. There has to be somebody to spend money in that store. Okay, so it's really housing that drives the retail component, whether that's housing that is in our area or somebody who drives an hour to come to us for whatever purpose it is. That's really important. And we have what I said before was the natural growth that would occur in the 5-year period, in 10, 20 years, that natural growth. And we did lots of different estimates because there's different ways you can look at that. You can assume that the unemployment rate is going to stay low at 3%. You can assume the unemployment rate is going to go back up to 10% that it was a few years ago. You can assume that it's going to be somewhere like it was a couple years before that it's going to be somewhere in between. You can assume that Blue Oval is going to have 5,000 employees and we're going to get 1,500 of those employees. And when you look at those figures from Blue Oval and you look at what's really being said there, because we have a 3% unemployment rate, which again is technically beyond full employment, the definition of full employment, okay, it means that virtually anybody who really wants a job can get a job, whether or not they're happy with the pay, the amount of hours or anything like that, they can get a job. The fact of the matter is that they have options. They may end up at being employed at the plant, but somebody else has got to provide the job that they were in. So we have the natural growth that's going to occur in the county based upon your natural growth that has occurred over time. We then have a second column here, which says Blue Oval. What's important about all these concepts is not the number itself, okay? But the fact of the matter is, in the worst case scenario, with the least favorable base assumptions for Tipton County, the Blue Oval growth essentially in 5 years is going to, the pressure on us, latent or otherwise, demand is going to be essentially what our natural rate of growth would have been. So we're doubling within a 5-year period at least, and we move on from there out to the 20-year period of time. So with the exception of the worst case scenario, which says you're going to essentially equal your natural growth, in all the other ones, you're well above, the Blue Oval exceeds the natural growth. Next slide.
Does everybody understand that? It's saying that with the least favorable variables, that we're talking about double the rate of growth that you are currently seeing.
That's it, double. In the worst case scenario, okay? So, and then we look at remember I defined for you market share, okay, breaking up what that means. And what we did was take your largest population centers, those that had been mentioned to me, actually before we interviewed most of you, but during our interviews, we broke them down and said that if you continue the way you have before, okay, that these are the number of units and how they would be divided in a 5 and 10 and 20-year period by the major population centers in the county. I'm not going to dwell on that too much because that heavily depends upon policies. It heavily depends upon if Covington, your capital, decides they want to capture all of it, okay? And they provide all the infrastructure that's necessary. They provide other incentives to make it happen. They make sure that they have the zoning and whatever densities are necessary to make that happen, that then, they could end up capturing more. But if you maintain what you have in the past, this is a breakdown of it. Next slide, please. So that we create the retail demand by that new growth in housing, both the blue oval and the natural. And what we come up with initially in this preliminary work is you're going to support about 2 million more square feet of retail space in the next 20 years. And here's where I'm going to inject where we are now. We had not at the time that we did this looked at other industrial activity that might be generating jobs. Well, your IDB and county, whatever term you want to use, and I know it's a separate entity with a separate authority, okay? Your elected officials, most of you who are in this room, okay, were very smart, okay, in acquiring land adjacent to the site of this plant, okay? And 358, more than 300 acres of land. If you alone were to develop that for industrial purposes at the normal amount of coverage that happens in industrial areas, you would generate another 6,000 to 8,000 employees on that ancillary activity that's going to occur, which means then you go back and say, our housing gets bumped up by a third more, and our retail now is up to 3 million square feet. Okay, so that's how it mushrooms, and that's what we look at. Now, if you choose not to capture it because you don't provide the infrastructure for it, that's your decision. It's your right as a jurisdiction. But if you don't, you're also not getting the tax revenue from it. You're not getting the other spin-off employment from it, and other factors that are important. I think that is one more slide, please. Okay, so we'll just, this is the same thing we did for the housing. We just divided that up by that market share kind of activity. The next slide, which is important.
Hey, Howard, before you go on, can I
Yes,
mention
sure.
something? So, guys, we've talked about the process before today. And that one of the things we're going to be doing is running these alternative development scenarios to kind of see how certain decisions impact the overall community to where we can find that preferred model, essentially that preferred path for the future. So what Howard just said, there was and I'm glad you said it, Howard, was a very clear illustration by designating or saying, well, we do want to grow our industrial base. There may be different motivations for that, right? Sometimes it's, because we want to grow our tax base. That's great. That's a great motivation. However, it's recognizing that, people work there and they create demand for things. And do we also, so by saying we want to do industrial growth here or this amount, do we also want to accommodate the additional potential 1 million square feet, which, by the way, 1 million square feet is approximately Wolf Chase Galleria. If you want to think of just, if you put it all in one box, and I'm not saying we're going to build a bunch of gallerias, I'm just saying, just to give you senses of scale here, across town in Memphis, the full building minus the atriums, or minus the atriums, there's open spaces, it's about 1 million square feet of space in that entire building. So a typical power center might be somewhere between 250 to 500,000. That's the big boxes with all the retail around it, 250 to 500,000 square feet retail. We don't have to make any of those decisions today, but I do want to make sure you guys start thinking about that, and it's something we're going to be analyzing with you, is when we make this decision here, okay, that's great, but how does that impact all of our other decision making, all the other qualities about the community? So sorry, Howard, it was a great point. I'm glad you brought it up. I want to make sure that
that they understood, and I appreciate that. And in fact, that's the whole point of what you're doing. Okay, is make those important decisions on who you want to be in the future, what you want to preserve, what you want to add to your base to have a long-term viable community. And I think that's the purpose why we're all here. This last slide covers a lot with respect to the residential. You have a choice, okay, of the density that you end up developing at. And we just use some arbitrary numbers here. Well, they're not really totally arbitrary. if you build one unit for 5 acres, and let's just deal with the county and not the individual's jurisdictions. If you build one unit for 5 acres, you've got 27,000 new acres of land that are going to be absorbed for housing. If it's 1 to 3, it goes down to 16. If it's one for every 2 acres, it goes down to about 11,000. If it goes down to 1 per acre, that's the number that you see there. And then you're talking about, essentially after that, you move into what I said was attached homes of some sort, whether they're duplex, whether they're quads, whether if they're on top of each other. No matter what they are, for all intent and purposes, there is likely to be a wall, with the exception of the first one. The first 2, you could still build on a 1/4 acre lot. Okay, but you got to have utilities in place to be able to do that. So the 2-1, the 4-1 is the 4-1 is a 1/4 acre lot. The 1/2 acre lot is the 2-1. Once you get beyond that, the 8-to-1 is a traditional size for, whether if you call it townhouse, brownstone, I don't care what term you use, but I think we all know what we're talking about. That typically is built at 8 units per acre. When you go above that, you can sometimes squeeze 10 units per acre in. And then when you start to get above that, you're talking about, you get into what's called floor area ratios and all these other things that you will talk about, okay, that changes the character of that housing to go up somewhat and things like that. You gain in elevation and that. Those are all decisions as you go through your process that you need to look at and work on based upon the demand that is likely to be there and the latent demand, and how much of that latent demand that you want to absorb, you as a collective county and you as individual jurisdictions inside that county. And remember the importance of market share in making those decisions. I'll now open up to any questions anybody has.
And before we move on to the Q&A, yes, it's a good point, Howard. So we've already heard from you guys. We're going to definitely go into Q&A here about the importance of certain aspects of the community, of existing character versus change, and enabling us to retain the character that we love while also accommodating growth and change. And so this begins to really illustrate that, right? That, for example, if open, productive agricultural production, if we want to keep at least some portion of our agricultural base that defines, we've heard that's important for you guys, farms not just as museums, but farms as operational farmland. If that's important, well, then we have to start thinking about, well, 5-acre estate lots. If all of that growth, we're not saying that would be something necessarily, unless y'all said, well, that's what we want. Absolutely, it's just all that. That eats up a lot of acres. And it's hard to farm land in small little chunks. So that's how that will impact our decision making, and to some extent. That balancing act.
Excuse me, Jonathan, and in the interviews that I conducted with many of you, there were 2 things that came out. There was a strong desire to preserve, for want of a better term, the quaintness, the character of your, like the area in Covington, your square area and things like that. There was also a strong desire to preserve agriculture. It is your primary industry in the area. Even after Blue Oval, people don't realize, but it's going to continue to be your primary industry in the area. And the question is how you help to make it continue to be viable over the next 20 years.
And one last point, Howard brought it, you mentioned it, like I said earlier, comparing square foot to buildings and big places that we know, just to give something relatively local, I guess Harbortown, for example, that's the average density for Harbortown. And I'm not talking, again, I think I've mentioned this before, not the northern part of the island, not Mud Island, Harbortown. There's a difference. Harbortown itself is at about 12 units per acre on average. People don't realize that, but that's on average, it's around 12 units an acre. There are places within that area where it goes up and places where it's a little bit less, but it averages out to about that. So that incorporates also all the open space, right? The shared parks, everything, the main street, the retail, just as a footprint. That's how many homes are there. Or housing units, to be clear, to Howard's point. So Q&A, yeah. This is a lot of information, and this isn't the final on this, as Howard said, this is preliminary. We find this to be exciting because we're planning nerds like that, but yes, sir.
Not really a question, but it might be just a suggestion because, everybody has, in the, municipalities, with their zoning regions, has different definitions of what makes their zone up, whether, if it's 11,000 square feet, 10,000 square feet.
Right.
It might be beneficial, you guys do, got it from everybody about what their square footage requirements are, for their zones,
Which that's definitely, and that is specific, that is very important, and that is, it's even more critically important for the next step. Essentially, when we start looking at, we want to make sure the future land use plan is relatable and informs zoning decisions, among many other decisions, that it can help inform zoning decisions. And that's specifically, that's where that becomes super critical. We do want to, at this point, we do want to keep it up high level enough to also let it inform maybe where do we need to update zoning in certain jurisdictions.
Well, like in the county, I mean, it's all new.
Yeah.
We recently worked on some zoning, but it's fairly new because we just hadn't had subdivisions come across in the rural area, like we're gonna see.
Right.
And I know a lot of that's gonna depend on, infrastructure, but, it may be where some places are going, their communities to look a little different than some of the others.
Right.
Some communities favor more of an R1, or larger, style lot. Some, are gonna be more beneficial to have the R4s, the smaller lots, things like that.
Right.
Or
Yeah.
the developers are looking for more density, save them money,
And to make sure it's clear to the future land use plan is we fully anticipate that as diverse as a community as it is today, it's kind of like that's directly reflected or will be in the future land use plan. There will be diversity within the future land use plan as well because of that issue, because we recognize that not everybody wants the same thing, and nor would we say as professionals is that a healthy thing for the community, that everybody is going to be an R1 lot. That's not healthy to have just that be your only tool in the toolbox, because it will be, in a lot of cases, like you're noting, it will be very local, place specific. So the future land use plan has to take this big vision for the whole county, for the entire community, to make sure that it best facilitates you guys getting to your vision and goals, but then is informative enough to where it can be broken down to help make local decisions, whether it be through a rezoning application. Is this appropriate to rezone this property for this use at this density? But then also to say at kind of that medium level, that administration level of, well, we have these zoning tools in place today, and we heard this from the community, and these are our vision and goals. To help get us there to those vision and goals, we might need to tweak our zoning in certain jurisdictions or in certain locations, or we need to, hey, we don't even have this zoning category, but we got to have this in order to check this item number 3 on our vision and goals. We need to create that tool. That may happen. I can't tell you that yet because I don't really know where we're going to end up there for sure. And so, yes, in the end, there will be that diversity, and but the plan will have to inform all the jurisdictions involved, recognizing those differences. So it's a good point.
Are there any specific questions related to the numbers that were shown?
Yes, sir.
Is there a trend in retail space for the average, because I just looked it up. The average retail store is 42,000 square feet. The average restaurant is 6,000 square feet. My sense is that 42,000 square feet includes large malls that are no longer going to be viable in most parts of our society.
But yeah, that includes everything from the super Target
Right.
on that average down
To a
to
store on the
boutique.
square.
Right.
So if you were guesstimating, and I know the number slides from 2 million to 3 million with one industrial development, but if you were guesstimating just based off that, restaurant sizing will change. 6,000 square feet is about what a restaurant is.
Right.
Where would we estimate retail space would be if we take malls out of it?
Howard,
What does that?
you want to speak to that first? Did you hear that?
Yes, and I do want to speak to it because the gentleman, I'm not, I don't know whether if I interviewed you or not, but there's no question, things are always changing, okay? Uh, you know, my father taught me a long time ago that there were two things that were inevitable, death and taxes. And I learned through life there are three things that are inevitable: death, taxes, and change. And if you're not willing to do the latter, you might as well do the former. And change is all around us, is going to continue. While it's true that the average size of the restaurant is 6,000 square feet, those are not the restaurants that are doing well. The larger restaurants and the chain restaurants are having serious fiscal problems, because what people have a tendency, they would rather go to what they perceive as being an independent operation run by either a mom and pop, or they don't know who it is, they don't care, but they perceive it as being a one-of-a-kind situation. There are a number of, for want of a better term, because it is really a chain, there are a number of restaurant chains now that every time they open someplace, and they're usually smaller than the 6,000 square feet, significantly smaller, they're changing the venue. One place it may be Italian, another place it may be Indian food, whatever the case may be, it will change, but it's really under one ownership. And so things are always changing. You know that over the years, department stores have diminished in importance. They were successfully fought by the Walmarts of the world. And there's some people that have told us, gee, they'd love to have another of the Walmart in the county in a different location. But we also know Walmart faced challenges from Amazon and other online venues. And so it's always evolving. And the numbers that we're going to get from this survey, again, which, Jonathan, push you, get as many people as you can to do it, because it's going to give us specific numbers on what you're doing in this county at this point in time, how you're spending the money, and what you want to see from, or what you can afford and what you're actually going to spend money on, so that we can determine whether that 60,000 square feet of space should be broken down by 20, or it should be broken down by 10 or 5, or whatever the case may be. So I hope that answers your question.
We're not here just giving you the monochrome answer.
No.
This is you are actively influencing the variables and the character of the response that you're going to get. It's not just the input output. This is an informed response, basically. And so that, yeah, when we hear that, well, we actually, yeah, we got this demand for this, but we don't want to build a mall. We want to have that locally sourced, locally based retail, that option. Well, that changes, right? That you, like Howard was saying, that changes the footprint of that building, and their needs and services are different than at the big box chain. And so we then calibrate our numbers and our response to say, well, yeah, in a neutral, bland field, this would be the answer. But this isn't a neutral, bland, just vacuum. You guys have choices. And even if we provided the big space, you may not, it wouldn't work because you don't want to shop there. There might be technical demand, but you're not going to shop there. So is it really viable? Nope.
And I'll use Covington as an example. Their square area, okay, where the probability is in the future, what you're going to see is a lot more small independent restaurant operations in that area, because that's what people want. That's what they really like. And that's what you're going to see evolve over time.
Not to get into too much of the micro there. And then then we have to look and say, well, the shops that are there, they're not restaurants there. Do we want to continue to accommodate that type of retail, that local, smaller retail in or near the square? That impacts our land use decisions. Because, yeah, the restaurants are probably going to be pushing those. There's going to be some pressure on those guys to be replaced by restaurants. Well, whoa, we don't want you to leave downtown. So maybe we need to think about ensuring that there's space for you right off the square, the streets leading up to the square. It gets very local, very micro, very quickly, but we have to know those preferences in order to even drill down to that level.
Any other questions for Howard?
in mind, this presentation will be posted on, so you can rewatch it, look at the numbers. We'll also, send out the top quiz.
And if we say this, I know with every meeting, if you think about it, as soon as you get in the car or something, this isn't your only shot at asking Howard a question. Please let us know, and let Robin know, and it'd be better if we could consolidate questions down before sending them, but if all we get are 1 or 2 questions, we'll shoot those to Howard and get your response. Yes, ma'am.
How much land right now is available to be developed to support this growth without us reaching out for farmlands or changing zoning and things like that?
It's that's a loaded question.
I could not can you repeat the question?
It was how much, basically how much land is available, Howard, for development that is already or is already serviced by utilities, or would be, basically it's a very easy prospect of servicing that with utilities that is not farmland. In my response, Howard, you may have a response. My response is that's a loaded question because it depends on all those variables. A home that's on a 5-acre estate right now, if that's what you want, well, that's it. If you say, no, we want to take a more balanced approach to density and housing types, well, that 5-acre estate lot right now can hold a lot of different things. It already has sewer, it already has power, it already has water, it's a school, 3 blocks away. And there's nothing remarkable about the house or its history or that building. Well, maybe the owner has been trying to sell it for years, and they just can't by right do anything more than a 5-acre lot. Well, that opens the door for a lot of possibilities. So it's hard to say what that number is, and also in town, specifically in those areas where utilities already exist in any of the communities, the inclination of the owner to part with that property in the name or to subdivide it totally drives that answer. Without talking to a lot of those owners, I couldn't tell you whether that property is available for redevelopment or not.
One of the other things that we're going to be doing in this process early on is looking at holding capacity of the land, and hopefully that will provide some clarity to the answer to the question.
Yep. That is like it's the next step. We're getting there. Sure.
One of the things that I talked to Howard about when I talked to him, my daughter was in a section of Raleigh, but this is obviously Raleigh, North Carolina. It's obviously, it was dense, but it feel dense. It would be multi-family homes. Then there would be 2-acre lot. Maybe there were $1 million homes, and then next to that would be retail that you never really knew when you left residential.
Right.
Kind of went into the retail side.
Right.
So you look at something like that, that's why I'm glad someone in a certain truth that have those ideas about how we use them. And the land use, they've done a phenomenal job of preserving what land there was because it was out in the country.
Right.
And then they developed this and they did it.
Well, and that is an approach, right? And so that's where land use, and we talk about those categories of land use, we see the acres and square footages here. Howard, correct me if I'm wrong here. These are not, this does not necessarily account for the z-axis for going up. And I'm not saying high rise, guys. I don't know if anybody think that, but that things can exist on top of each other. Kind of back to the residential, but also residential over retail, for example, residential over office space. Both the horizontal and a vertical mixed use approach. You can accommodate both, but it's not universal, except I did see a recent version, I think it's Walmart or somebody in LA, or is an IKEA or somebody, they're incorporating residential into a big box over it. I'm not saying we're going there, guys. You can do that, but you have to know those preferences. The way small retail integrates in a mixed use environment is different than the way big retail, big office, big commercial, or industrial, for example, integrates into a mixed use environment.
There was nothing over there that a tree couldn't outgrow.
Right. Yeah.
So
And
John,
I want to be clear though, too, that we're only going to be, because I don't want to overpromise on this part of the process, guys, is land use will be able to describe mixed use. It'll provide that opportunity to create those types of places. but you have to go beyond that into actual design regulations. So that will be through zoning, that'll be through subdivision regs, things like that. In order, this will help you get there, but it won't regulate you to get there. Those regulations can be a next step. Doesn't have to be us, it can be anybody, it can be you guys, internal, whatever it is say, okay, well, here's our vision, our goals. This future land use plan helps us get there from as far as the types and distribution and relationships between those uses and the amounts, the scales. But to get a particular look and feel of a place, you have to dive in deeper into regulations. And so this will help you figure out, well, are existing regulations going to get us there? Is the only thing we need to do is change our future land use plan and maybe tweak our zoning, or do we need to dive deeper to get there? This will help you figure that out. Any other questions? All right, Howard, thank you so much.
No, thank you. And I look forward to continuing down this walkway or this path. It's fun.
Yeah. No, this was great.
Should I disconnect?
Okay, yeah, okay, thanks, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Now we're gonna move into our different visioning session dates and some of the details.
So, reset, yep.
We may take a short break to do, paperwork. Everyone can use the restroom at that point, and then we'll go into the training session as well. So here you see 3 different dates. 4/13, that's when we're gonna have that survey up. That would be at Brighton Baptist Church. We've been starting with some stakeholder meetings earlier today, and then at the 4:30 portion, that would be open to the public. We're also going to allow the public to filter in, and that's why we're needing some of your help as well, to facilitate those items. We'll talk about that shortly. Now, Robin has been working on trying to secure the 4/19 date at the Greenleaf Community Church, and there apparently was a death in the family, and so there's been a little bit of communication issue right now. We're hoping to have that locked in maybe by Friday. We'll let you know for sure. And we'll send out a flyer, which I'll show you shortly about that. And then on the 25th, that's the big one. That's in Covington. That is going to start with the stakeholder meetings. We'll move into a bigger space, and then we'll have the open house. During that open house, we begin with the reception up till 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock, there'll be a formal presentation, and then we'll do a breakout session. And that's where we're going to need your help in to facilitate those meetings, depending on the crowd size. But we're anticipating somewhere around maybe 100, 150 people.
If we do our job right, it'll be even higher. It'll be even more. Yeah. As far as getting the word out, it's not just us. If we, the collective we, do a really good job of getting that word out, it'll be even more. Because I think there is going to be, from what I'm hearing from you guys, and in the background, there's a lot of interest building among everybody in the county over this process. So I expect that usually generates a higher turnout.
So this is the draft flyer. Once we lock in that date for the April 19th meeting, we'll get that sent out. This has the times for the actual public to come. We may do a version for the actual stakeholder meetings as well, and I'll talk about those agendas in a few minutes.
And Scott, could you describe this flyer real quick? Like it's an 8.5 by 11.
Yes, you can hang it in the church. You can pin it on a wall at your work, wherever you want to place it, email it out. It will also be placed on the website. It has a short intro, just talks about a little bit about the process, refers at the bottom to the website again, where they can find more information.
So the first folks I'd ask is if we get you a copy, like we could put it up in the window or a place here in the museum, for example. I would encourage us to do for everybody to do this everywhere, places of work, schools, churches. Ask the grocery store if you can put this up everywhere, restaurants. And it looks, we did the colors, of course, with you guys in the design, but then also we made sure that it looks good printed black and white too. So with the grayscale, so it still reads well. So we'd encourage this to go up everywhere.
Thanks for picking out Tiffany.
Yeah.
For the theme as well. So here you see the typical day. The first stakeholder meeting beginning at 10 a.m. with youth, recreation, and engagement sessions. We have a list of different groups that Robin has assembled for us for each of these. We continue to add more before we think we may be missing something. Let's say maybe someone from the seniors or a church youth leader or something like that that may be added. Then we move into the general welfare and culture. We have a lunch break, then the municipal utility group, and then the geographic interest, finally by the public engagement session or the open house later on for that third meeting. And just one thing to mention, the training documents we're about to hand out, there will be specific questions related to each of these groups, especially about the last question. So we're going to gear some of those questions to the particular group based on the topic or whatever.
Which we're not gonna go through those, where Scott's going with that, is we're not gonna go through those specific questions with everybody today. We'll go over those with the volunteers that sign up. It'll be based on who's actually gonna be in each one of these sessions. We didn't wanna weigh everybody down with everything today.
So if you're interested in volunteering, please contact Robin.
We need those, yeah.
Absolutely. So each of these individual meetings will begin with the introduction. LRK may facilitate a lot of that, kind of talk about the process and what we're trying to get at. And then we're going to ask for your help to actually facilitate the discussion. So there'll be 4 questions. We'll show you those shortly. Icebreaker will be the first one, will be 5 minutes, something to lighten the room and discussion. Then we get into more specifics about what the land use should be, where it should be, and so on. Then we wrap up. Each of these would last about an hour. We allow a little bit extra time, give them maybe 10 or 15 extra minutes to wrap it up. But somebody's job in the assignment will be to kind of track the time and help us move on. This will help walk you through what is needed at the individual meetings. Facilitate those meetings. There's different positions for each of those. There's the main facilitator, there's a note taker, there's a floater, and then there's another person that will need help with as well. So
Don't let the weight of these things, first off, scare you off from volunteering. It's not that complicated. We just wanted to make sure everybody was really well prepared. That's why we're not calling it a book or a manual, right, Scott?
Get away from that. So we're going to talk about facilitator roles, tip for each role. We'll have discussion, questions, prompts, and helpful hints, and that's different hints to try to generate more discussion. Let's say you're running into an issue. Also, let's say you may have someone that may be a little more aggressive than others, and you're having issues trying to get everyone in to speak. So we'll give you some tips for that as well. We'll talk about wrap up and closing remarks. And one of the jobs for one of the facilitators will be to help track the time, make sure that we're staying on track with those 15 to 10 minute questions that we're going to go into.
Yeah, to the actual question part.
Okay.
So on
For the
page,
training guide. The purpose of the guide is to provide facilitators the necessary knowledge, tools, techniques to effectively organize, conduct stakeholder meetings, and then the breakout discussions. Those breakout discussions we're talking about at the actual open house.
Guys, if you've done this before, we appreciate you bearing with us on these. There's nothing necessarily special about if you've done a stakeholder listening session or something like that before, or been involved in one of those groups. There's nothing inherently special or different about what we're doing. It's just the topics we're covering. So again, this isn't like some brand new animal you probably haven't seen before. So just keep that in mind. Please volunteer.
And the 3 of us will be here to support you the entire way through. So the primary objective is to identify needs, preferences, opportunities related to land use, as well as to establish shared vision for enhancing the quality of life. And we'll get into each of these 4 parts here. We talked about that icebreaker as part 1. That's just to kind of lighten the mood. The exploration of what is currently meeting what we would like to see in the future. That's number 2. A deeper dive into where investment should occur. That's getting into a location. And then some of the specifics. And those are those questions that we're talking about that will be geared towards the individual groups. So you can see each of the descriptions there, icebreaker, helpful hints, question. The question is the main thing that is intended to acquire the input that we need, and we're gonna ask somebody to take notes. We'll have a pad there. Then we'll have the prompts and the follow-up questions. So on the second page of your document. That icebreaker is intended only for the last 5 minutes. And that question would be, what is your favorite spot, drive, or event in Tipton County? So what is your favorite place in Tipton County, more or less? Try to keep that to 5 minutes, then we'll move into the 15-minute questions.
As Scott noted, so the whole point of all of this is to be that we have opportunity. There's risk involved in growth. For everybody who's been here and known, we've talked about this a dozen times. There's risk involved with change, but there's also enormous opportunity. So this is a positive event. The language is positive. The discussion is positive. People may bring up negative stuff. That's okay. We document that. But this is aspirational. We're shooting for how everybody wants to shoot, whatever y'all determine. And so don't hold back. Don't get bogged down in the mess and the negativeness that might permeate. Oh, well, we can't. If you ever hear, let me put it this way. Here's a good example. If you hear, well, I'd like to do this, but we can't do that here. You nip that in the bud as nicely and politely and as, oh, bless your heart, as you can. Say, we may not have been able to do that in the past, but we are going to do that going forward. We're aspirational here. We're not going to let our past hold us back.
Part 2 question is dealing with what is missing in the community today and what are our aspirations for the future. So that question, specific question, is what types of uses or activities are not present today but could potentially be introduced in the future. Again, into what Jonathan was just saying, it is always possible to occur later on. So what activities would you like to engage in on a daily basis? And one thing that you may want to ask them, if you want to engage in this on a daily basis, is that something you want to drive to, or is it something you want within a 15-minute walk of your place of work or your home? So that is one of the questions, the follow-up questions and hints to get into in some of these questions.
It can be anything, guys. If they say, you know what, I'd love to have a spaceport within walking distance of here, well, noted. A little unusual. We'll talk about the impact later. But noted, if they say I want a bowling alley, if they say I don't know, I don't want to walk more than 5 minutes to get to my kids' elementary school, noted. We will all together, us and with you, will glean what we need to, all the information that can be derived from those statements later. But note that anything it's open. Like I said, the sky's the limit. Think big.
So the follow-up there's 3 questions or follow-ups here. One relates to size and scale. One's related to numbers or quantity or where that should be in the proximity as well. So there we get into that 5 to 15 minute walk or drive in some of those locations. Next question. This one is very important for land use. Question that's going to appear on the survey that we've been working on. This really relates to where you want to see the development and growth occur. And so we get into select up to 3 of features or locations where you most prefer development or redevelopment occur. So some of that gets into redevelopment of abandoned, obsolete property in existing communities. We talk about infill development, let's say vacant land near the square in Clinton, or somewhere like that. Yeah. Also along the major corridors coming into your town. Also at the gateways. Areas adjacent to existing communities. That might be your annexation reserve, more or less.
Growth boundary, yeah. Growth boundaries.
Growth boundaries.
Yes.
And then clusters of development that may occur adjacent to unincorporated rural communities. Let's say a little farming community that's at crossroads.
Charleston,
intersection.
good example.
Where you may have a little village store or just some features there, maybe a park for the community as well, and some development around that. And then getting into the rural farmland, kind of the more remote areas. rolling and heavily forested rural property, or balance of all of that. So, you know, a follow-up question or problem might be where you want that or where you do not want that. So it'd be nice to have some of those answers where they don't want it.
So we'll give you guys some props too, just so you know, so, because I mean, if you read through that list with that table of 5 to 10 people, that's all your time for this question. I can guarantee you that, that alone, just them identifying that, you've already, that's it. And so we'll have props for some of the groups, depending on the question and the group, where we can have that up there to where people can, you know, say, oh, that one, that one, that one, or they can just talk about those 3 that we don't need every single person at the table to document their preferred 3. And we write that down. This is a discussion to identify those 3 and talk amongst everybody to figure those out together in a lot of ways, but we will have those available where you don't have to sit there and read and then repeat and then repeat. Like, wait, what was the 5th one again? No, we'll have that there for you.
And some of the props might also be maps. Let's say this one here of Covington, where it may show what a 15-minute walk is. So the dimension for that, we have one that's countywide as well, with some of these communities as well shown.
Yeah, we've got one for Wayne and Scott have done a great job. So I'm showing this off a little bit, Scott. I know it takes some time, but they've done some of these like walking radius maps, travel distance radius maps, drive and walk for all of the incorporated communities in the county. And then there's one bigger one for the entire county. It shows like driving distances so that when people think about it, because your idea of a 5-minute walk might be different than my idea of a 5-minute walk. And people might be a little surprised to learn that as a crow flies, at least, I know we're not crows, but as far as those walking distances, just kind of how close we can get or how far we are from everything. Or that, you know, pretty much you guys probably already realized this, but just about everything in Gilt Edge can be reached in about 5 minutes from that intersection. At a medium pace, by the way. For that.
Yeah, that's all based on a quarter mile. Let's get on to part 4. These are those specific issues or concerns for each individual stakeholder group. We try to keep this to about 10 minutes. If this flows over, maybe an extra 10 minutes, we should be fine as well. So, are there any particular issues or concerns that may be impacted by or as the community grows? And you see some of the examples provided there, traffic and so on. And how could community growth affect the resources that impact you? So those are kind of the prompts, follow-up questions. What does that group feel that could be impacted most that deals with the topic of your group? So we are going to continue to craft these follow-up questions that you see below that. So you see one that's listed there for property owner. Down below, there's one for the municipal group. And that particular question relates to what types of developments do you think are most important for long-term fiscal sustainability of your community? So each of these will be geared towards the group that you'll have. And so those are the questions we want you to focus on. And encourage them to share their unique perspective and expertise for those particular groups as well.
Because in the end, that's why we have all of these different stakeholder groups, right? Why they're by topic as well. Because the president of the student body for the high school is going to have a different perspective on life in the community and the future of land use than a 10,000, potentially at least, the 10,000 acre property owner, the active farmer out in the countryside. They're going to have different perspectives on all of these things. And that's why we have them in those groups, because we want those unique perspectives, kind of that bias, if you will. We want that bias in that discussion.
So the next page, you'll find some of the tips for each one of the facilitators. So the main facilitators at the top, then you have your note taker, your greeter, and your floating person, and then some tips for each of those. So as you're assigned a position, and it may be that you kind of float around anyway with some of these other positions, say the greeter. If there's no one coming in at that time, it's also good to float around. Let's say there's some public coming in, kind of walk them through some of the exhibits, take notes, and so on. So familiarize yourself with the agenda if you're the main facilitator. Ensure everyone has the opportunity to speak. And talk about someone that may be a little bit more aggressive. take a note what they're saying, but then let's say John or Susie, we need to hear from you too. So just try to redirect if you can, so that they don't become too dominant. Make a conscious effort to involve all of those at the table, and then listen attentively. Make notes, or at least the note taker should take the notes in a consistent format. You need to report the main ideas, not necessarily all the details, and then after the discussion, review and clarify the notes. For the greeter, we suggest that you be there about 30 minutes ahead of each of these sessions to help get people signed in, give them name tags and handouts if there's going to be handouts as well. And then for the floating person, again, as public may come through, let's say even members of the media, kind of walk them through, take notes and so on, and hand them any extra handouts that may be around. So at the bottom, you see each of those facilitator roles. There's going to probably be three of us, the three that you see here, maybe Frank will get some of those as well. And we will help walk you through each of those. So again, you have the main facilitator, the greeter, the note taker, and the floating person. And there'll be one or two of us at that main table to help facilitate the meeting as well. And then one to work around the document as others come in.
We can work out a call or a signal if you need to, you know, a call or something, whatever it is, certain hand gesture, like if you run into a particular problem, it's not like I'm just going to stand back and say, well, it's your process. No, that's why we're there too, is we're not just there to observe, but we're there to participate and to help lead and to also help you get out of it. There, every now and then there's a rut and you got to get out of the rut. And sometimes you need more people pushing the vehicle to get them out of the rut. And that's why we're there. So we're there to help in those regards. And a great way to introduce it, if you have somebody who's particularly fired up, it's not ornery, they're passionate, right? It's all positive words. They're passionate about something. And that passion is drowning the table. You say, hey, Jonathan, Bob here's got a good point, or Bob, you know, you should really come listen in on this. And that's a great way to get our attention, but then also do it in a supportive, positive way for the person who's talking. And then I say, that's great, Bob. Why don't we walk outside here for just a minute? You said, that's great. Well, I'm glad. Hey, well, what is everybody else at the table? What is the other people? What are the, okay, Bob, okay, well, Susie, well, what do you think about that? Or in your experience, is that kind of the same thing? And then we get the other folks, and we've made sure that we've documented Bob's points, clearly documented, but then we move on gently and then positively. So, yep, I've been there and done that. I'm not going to say it works every time, but it works 99% of the time.
We'll definitely help you do that. Next. So for the individual meetings, the first 5 to 7 minutes, give a little kickoff presentation. That may be LRK, maybe kind of do an introduction and talk a little bit about the process itself before we get into the individual questions. That's what we're going to look for, the facilitator to go into those 4 questions for about 45 minutes, maybe 50 minutes or so. And then we'll wrap up with the last 10 minutes of the meeting. So again, you see the 4 different groups and the time frames for each of those groups. Definitely talk to Robin about volunteering if she doesn't have enough for each of those dates. Locations, it would be very helpful for her. And then finally, the 3 locations there at the bottom. Again, we'll send out an update as soon as we have confirmation about the April 19th meeting at Greenleaf Community Church. Were there any questions?
I think we might have a question. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, we're just looking at, this is the middle of a work day, all 3 of them agree today. I think that's really gonna hurt the crowd and the inability of a lot of people.
And I think that it's a very confusing process, I think, because we don't always know these terms, but we are inviting ahead of time specific people to make sure they are there.
Okay.
And then it's also available to public. So we're not just counting on people.
Okay.
So I have my list and I will ensure that we've got at least 5 to 7 people there to share their opinions. And then we'll
Robin,
For the- I got you.
Right. And the topics,
Go ahead.
areas of the topics.
And then kind of like the grand finale at Dyersburg State,
Right.
when it's all kind of compiled, that's
Right.
when it's gonna be like 6 o'clock or something.
Right, when it's where
Every.
Now, we're not looking to exclude the public from any of these. These are public meetings. And so that's one of the reasons for the floater is anybody can walk in. They're
It's a
free to
slide,
walk
yeah.
in. We're not encouraging people to show up at 11 a.m. off the street, but they can. We're encouraging them on each one of those days that if you would like to join us on each one of those days and locations, 5:30. That's where, and the way we say that is not, it's not an exclusive process, guys. We want to make sure that people don't feel like things are occurring behind closed doors. That's one of the reasons that it's open, is that you're welcome to come and sit and listen in on this. But this is for this group of folks. We encourage you to listen. And if you have opinions on that, hey, come tell me. I'm the floater, and I'm going to document those over here on this pad. But tell you what, if you can either show back up at 5:30, or it's another reason we're encouraging folks to come later in the day. We're going to be set up to engage with everybody a little bit better. That's going to be your best opportunity, because that's where we're going to be prepared to engage with everybody is after 5:30. So that's where you'll get the most out of it, and we'll get the most out of it.
And that's at each, that's
Yes,
not
ma'am.
just the one day at
Right.
Darklands Bay, that's
Right.
at each.
And
place.
so these will essentially be open house listening sessions where it's not the focus groups. That's from the
Yeah.
5:30 to 7:30 for the first two. The third one, the big open house, that's the one where it's like, listen, if you can't make it to this, that's fine. We'd like for you to be there. If you want to be there, it's an opportunity for you to engage and share. And we'd love to hear from you. But if you can only make one meeting, we're going to encourage you to show up at that last one, because that's where we're going to have the most opportunities for you to engage in an informed discussion in informed ways. And in some cases, depending on whether you like this stuff or not, a fun way with us to help inform the process.
So what's on the flyer? The times are listed on the flyer for the public to see, the 4:30 or the 5:30.
Right, yeah. Sorry, Scott. Yeah, that was the 4:30.
Yeah, 4:30 to 5.
Sorry, I confused that. Sorry, I was referring to the, yeah, it's for most of those first two, it's the 4:30.
Okay.
And they did say they won't, be prepared if you volunteer, and like, we're not gonna push everybody out the door at 5 o'clock.
Right. Yes,
So
sir.
one question for Robin and one question for Scott. Robin, after the Greenleaf confirms, it would be okay, you let us know and we can start posting that flyer.
We have hopefully, and I've talked to Lawrence Chamber, Rosemary also, we'll get it out, and I will email out hopefully by Friday and be able to say, yes, please get this out there, share it on.
So then social media goes crazy.
Yes,
And then,
as soon as I hate it, but
Yeah,
I
that's
haven't been
right.
able to get a hold of it. So.
and then for Scott, on part 4, when you talk about particular issues, so is this document done, or is it flexible to add a suggestion?
If you have suggestions.
So I would definitely add public safety right after traffic congestion. And the reason I would add public safety is because every discussion we're having includes public safety. Done that? Traffic, yes, but public safety.
Yep.
We number 1 and 2 on that. That'd be.
And several of y'all have already told me you would like to volunteer for the stakeholder meetings, but now that we have the locations and the dates, if you would let me know specifically which one you would like to volunteer at, or if you want to be at all of them, and now that we know the different roles, if you would let me know, I'm going to do a paper at, right, whatever, just let me know.
We would love to have you come and join us. Make sure it's clear, and I think it is, because I know Robin's talking to everybody. We'd love to have you join us for the whole day, facilitate discussions for all those groups, but we realize that people have lives and jobs and families. And so if all you can do is show up and help facilitate just that 10 to 11 a.m., that's great. We can use you. Like, we really need that. If all you can do is, 2 to 3, great. If you can do the 3:30 to 4:30, but not the one after that, or if you can do the 3:30 to 4:30, but not the public part after, that's great. Just let us know. We need 3 to 4 people at each one of those time slots. It can be the same person or it can be somebody different. I would encourage people to be there all day, but I also realize on your standpoint, trust me, by about here, you can get a little tired. We can switch you up. We can also switch you up in your roles though too. You can be a note taker on this one, facilitator on this one, the greeter, the floater on this one. So, but that also, it can be exhausting after a full day. So just keep that in mind. But yeah, we have to have 3 to 4 for each one of those time slots.
We might just split one in that.
Yes, yeah. If you can come for this one and then come again here, great. Really, just let us know. But I would encourage everybody, if at all possible, to volunteer for at least one of these, because it gets you in front of the public as the steering committee. And that's also important. They need to see you as leading this, and that basically the truth of the matter, that you're leading this and that we're just the facilitators.
Now, we realize that not everyone's gonna be able to show up for the open house, but we're hoping to have at least 25 to 30 to help with these group breakout sessions and discussions. Please try to make it through, and if you can't make it, try to let us know.
These are fun, guys. I know it may, if you have any kind of feeling this is daunting in any way, just your neighboring county, we have the same qualms. A lot more people, I think, who were not necessarily or hadn't done this before or never done anything like this or even participated in one of these things before, who were nervous about it but led it. And I didn't have, like, everybody came away very positive. They were glad that they volunteered. They got more out of it, I think, than the participants did, and just in that opportunity to engage and lead. So it's fun. It can be a lot of fun. It can be very gratifying. So please volunteer if you haven't done so, for at least one of these sessions.
This is your homework. We will send out, like what we heard, if you have any comments, send those to us maybe by Friday, if possible. We'll try to incorporate any new questions in there, maybe by the week next week. We'll send out an updated version of this in about a week.
Once we get those names, those volunteers for each time slot, we'll send out the information like this specific to that group and that topic.
So we'll send out more information. We'll have some follow-up emails that come out in the next few days. If you have any questions,
Yeah, thank you guys. Hey, as always, thank you all for the opportunity and thank you for being here.